It is a new year, and that means there are new court cases headed to the Supreme Court. Joining us this morning with what cases to watch out for is 90s legal expert Whitney Traylor. Whitney, good morning.
Good morning, Jordan.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Here we are. We made it.
Yep, and we got to talk about the important stuff that's still to come. So before we get into the actual cases, it seems like the Supreme Court is taking on fewer cases this time around. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's really the reality. So in order for a case to get to the Supreme Court, you have to file a writ of certiorari. So you don't always get to the Supreme Court. They accept, they get over 1,000 writs a year, and they accept less than 100. So it's very few. This year, they're actually accepting much less than they normally do, like half of the cases that they normally do. And some people will say, well, that means that they're going to be a pacifist court. They're not going to be an activist court. They're not going to try and make law. They're just looking at issues strictly for their constitutionality, whether it's constitutional or not. So I think we're going to see less cases this year, which means it's going to be a little bit of a pacifist court.
What they have decided to put on their docket, what are some of the cases that are still standing out to you?
Well, there's a number of big ones. Obviously, the biggest one, which is, well, not necessarily the biggest one, but something coming up in January is the TikTok ban.
People would argue that is a big one.
Right. Yeah, it's very significant. And so the court has accepted writ. They asked for briefs to be submitted by January 10th, and they're going to hear, and they're supposed to rule by the 19th, because if TikTok is not sold by the 19th, this ban is supposed to go into effect. So we're going to be looking out for that. There's also a case dealing with ghost guns. Those are guns that are created without a serial number, so from a number of parts or whatever. And so the ATF, the question is, should Arms, Tobacco, and Firearms be able to regulate those ghost guns? That's going to be a really big case, because there's at least 20,000 ghost guns out there. And then there's a case dealing with what we call reverse discrimination, where a heterosexual woman didn't get a position in favor of a gay man, and she claims it was reverse discrimination based on Title VII. So the court's going to accept that case, or going to hear argument, I think, in February on that case. So that's going to be really interesting to see, because if the court rules in her favor, that could really change the trajectory of civil rights law in terms of these kind of reverse discrimination claims.
Right. You were talking about TikTok a little bit earlier. That deadline, of course, coming up very quickly with what you were just talking about there. That one gets a little bit interesting, though, because now you have President-elect Donald Trump, of course, not in office, but who has asked the Supreme Court to kind of hold off on this.
Yes, that's a great point. And so you look at the new administration, and at first he actually implemented the ban when he was in office for the first time. Now he's met with the TikTok executives, and he's saying, well, let's wait and see. So that's going to be very significant, because if the administration says, no, let's go forward with TikTok, and they're very business oriented, they're looking at deregulation, then if that's the case, then I could see TikTok going forward and the U.S. working with them in some way.
Yeah, so fewer cases, but as you mentioned, TikTok, ghost guns, and gender-affirming care, all very impactful cases for people across the country.
Yeah, so we got to look out, and I'll be back in 2025 to talk about them, how they decide these cases.
All right, well, we always look forward to that. Whitney, thank you very much. We appreciate you, and again, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you.
All right.